So beautiful picture here of that Emirates FA Cup trophy. Let's take a quick look here at the fifth round fixtures that occurred this between last Friday and today. You mentioned Ipswich Forest today. They drew 1-1. From what I hear, it was a dire affair. Forest advanced on penalties. Fulham advanced at Old Trafford on penalties after what was also another brutal match for the United supporters to kind of sift through. City took out Plymouth Argyle, even though Plymouth did take the lead early in the first half, which I'm sure sent a little bit of shockwaves and a little excitement to those Plymouth Argyle supporters. Villa 2-0 victory. Crystal Palace 3-1 over Millwall, and Bournemouth taking out Wolves on penalties. We will get to the Mateus Cunha red. But before we talk about those, I do want to touch on the one match that was championship versus championship, Preston versus Burnley. We've had discussions around whether or not the FA Cup was losing some of its luster and its magic, Paul, mainly because I believe the gap between the Premier League and the Championship has never been larger. This was a match between two championship sides, one in scintillating form and one not doing so well. You wouldn't believe it by the scoreline. Burnley had not conceded a goal in open play since December 24th. I repeat that, had not conceded a goal in open play since December and gave up 3 goals. If you are a Burnley supporter, are you frustrated with your manager making 9 changes? Or is this what has happened to this tournament because of how valuable something like an automatic promotion is to a side like Burnley? Like, if you're a Burnley supporter, should they have been going for a quarterfinal appearance, hopefully getting a good draw and a day at Wembley? Or should they mainly be focused on Premier League status and getting back? Because I think the difference between a supporter and a guy sitting at the board have a drastic different opinion on that question.
I mean, I think you have to be frustrated by that. I mean, this has got to be one of the premier competitions you're in if you're Burnley. I mean, obviously you're fighting it back in the Premier League, but like, I don't understand, having the year that they're having, you make that many changes and you concede 3 to a bottom of the championship team. It's wild to me. And although the championship's a little bit more competitive, I don't feel like in a cup in this phase of the competition and this part of the year for a club like Burnley, I don't know how you don't prioritize that. And the lineup, the changes they made aren't consistent with a club that's prioritizing that competition. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, they do have a match on Tuesday. They do play tomorrow against Cardiff in the league. And that is their game in hand. So if they were to win that game, they would get back within 2 points of Sheffield United in second place for that guaranteed promotion spot. I know Sheffield United's only 3 points behind Leeds, but I don't feel like anybody's catching Leeds because I think if Leeds needs to, they have a second gear that nobody else in that division can probably take. I guess my question is should these clubs, with all the money, and we talk about the balloon payments and the amount of money you get for coming up to the Premier League, is this more on management for not understanding the importance? Should there be more of a balance? Do you think this is a directive from the owners, from the directors of that club to say, hey, Scott Parker, if you plan to be here next year, you better be in the Premier League, because if you win an FA Cup and we get to play in the Europa League, but we're back in the Championship, we don't give 2 bleeps.
I mean, I think that's probable, right? But I also think there's a world in which Parker gets a certain amount of bonus money for getting a guaranteed qualification in the Premier League that he doesn't get for advancing to the next round of the FA Cup. You know what I mean? So I think it could have to do with contractual bonuses as well. I just think, man, I feel like I'm getting old because I feel like one of those people where like I really am strongly believing that money in some way is ruining football, right? Like, because when you're
Some
making
way.
these
I don't think it's some way.
yeah,
I think money has changed this game on all levels to the point where clubs try to balance books rather than win things. And I think the difference is I mean, look at Arsenal right now. Arsenal could have spent 80 to 100 million in January, brought in a striker. They probably weren't going to catch Liverpool. But if they buy a striker on January 1st and they score some goals in January and pick up more points than they did, they start to put pressure on Liverpool at a time when Liverpool starts to concede and concede a little bit in that title. And let's be real, the difference is the Arsenal owner said, I'm not sure if we buy that striker, we win the league.
yep.
But I'm pretty sure we're going to finish second no matter what. And I'll take Champions League football and a balanced books. We'll buy that player in the summer. Just doesn't feel like the way you want it if you're a supporter.
Yeah, totally. I think that's the end. I think that's my big beef, right? I think like decisions are being made around lineups and how you attack competitions that are inconsistent with just going out and putting your best product on the pitch and trying to win every week.
So I don't know that there were that many shocks. I will say when we look at the next round of fixtures, what is beautiful about this is if you had said to me, what is the one team Man City doesn't want to play that's advanced in this draw, I'd probably say they probably don't want a free flowing team like Bournemouth. And if they do get Bournemouth, they don't want to play them at Bournemouth. And that's what they drew. So in some ways, if Bournemouth were ever to be able to beat City, to me, this is a neutral fan's dream. Getting to a Final Four at Wembley that doesn't have Chelsea, Spurs, Liverpool, Arsenal, Man City, Man United, even Newcastle. I mean, we're talking about clubs like Forest, Fulham, Brighton, Bournemouth, Crystal Palace.
And most of them are probably better than City.
I think at least four of them. But I just think like that's what this was supposed to be about. So to me, this could make for a really, really special semifinals kind of moment and a special, special finals because you could have two teams playing for a chance to play in the Europa League that haven't played in Europe in 10 or 15 years. And you can also just have those moments of just the day out for those supporters. So talk a little bit here quickly before we look at those next round fixtures and give our predictions. The craziness that was this weekend, I believe, is kind of wrapped up in the 3 red card offenses. So I think each of them can be talked about in almost a different light. None of them, in my opinion, are questionable red cards. I think they're all red cards. They all would be held up upon review. Someone's going to have to explain to me how the one in the upper left-hand corner took a VAR decision to adjudicate. So let's start with that one. Really, really sad. I think it was 25 stitches to the head after being brought back to consciousness. For Mateta, maybe one of the top 2 or 3 informed players in all the Premier League. Probably going to miss out on what some were believing were going to be his first starts for France at striker. This poor kid gets a Millwall boot to the face that is going to stop him during the next international window, getting an actual look in at playing alongside Kylian Mbappe through the middle for France. Probably no player has worked harder to earn something like that than Mateta in his time at Crystal Palace. And it looks like it'll all be for naught. The worst part of this isn't the view we see. It's that Michael Oliver was literally 10 yards direct on this to the same view we're seeing and did not show a red card until brought to the monitor. So I don't think you're going to condone the play by the keeper. I think the keeper showed immediately he had contrition and felt terrible. He looked distraught as he walked off. All that being said, other than the fact that he plays for Millwall, which means he's probably a terrible human being deep down inside, what can be done with Michael Oliver, and at what point will the PGMOL realize you cannot continue to troll him out there if he can't get out of his own way? Because I've said it before on a lot of airwaves on this channel, right? I don't think he's ever responded or recovered from the afternoon in Madrid where he sent off Buffon for the double red card and awarded the penalty for Madrid that sent Juventus out. I think his whole entire coaching, like his refereeing career, his confidence was shot from that moment on. Is this a point where they have to demote this referee to the championship and not let us see him again for the rest of the season? Because it's almost comical at this point.
You'd think so. They won't. I mean, the whole thing feels like a fever dream. It's the craziest challenge I've possibly ever seen. It also, like, in totality, is like vintage. Like, it's almost like early 90s Millwall. Like, you know what I mean? It's almost like so stereotypical. I also don't know how somebody gets 25 stitches in their ear. How big is Mateta's ear? That's insane. But yeah, the whole thing is just wild, man. I would think that with Oliver, I just don't see it happening, especially since they, like, there's this crazy stock for, like, you know, the casuals that Oliver is considered like part of some of the best refereeing in England, which, like, I think anybody who regularly watches knows it's not true. But I don't know. I don't know how you can see that challenge. And let's say he doesn't even connect flush. Let's say, like, you know,
it's still a red card. If he just misses him,
it's still a red. Like, all you need to see is the position of the tackle. Like, none of it makes sense to me. I have no idea why you would go to a monitor for that. I have no idea, based on the positioning of that challenge, how it wasn't just a red on premise.
So let's go to the one on the right of the screen. It's almost a perfect still frame because it represents truly why it's a red card and why it has to be a red card. I will say, when I first saw the Anthony Gordon one the first time, before they showed the alternate angles, I thought to myself, wow, a straight red for that? That could be harsh. Let me see this again. I saw it. I was like, eh. Then when they slowed it down and showed this frame, I think for me, a guy who has defended Anthony Gordon at times, who thinks he's an immense talent, this, to me, if I'm a Newcastle supporter, I'm so disappointed, not in the fact that he got caught up in the moment, because I think any player can see red, see the mist, and do something stupid, put your hands out. And I do think in a lot of ways he was trying to push the player off or grabbing the jersey, but he gets side of his head, and as soon as you don't let go and you actually follow through and push the player down to the ground by their head, you're going to see a red card. The issue for me is that when this happens, the ball is literally rolling out of bounds. Like, the ball is so far away from him, it's not even like he's fighting anymore. Like, it's over. The play has been whistled. The call is done. So the petulance is that is the embarrassment of the act worse than the fact that this wasn't, you know, even to Matthias Cunha, this wasn't a clash where two players hit a moment and then one guy goes over the line when both players step to each other and one guy's stupid enough to lean forward. This is almost like Gordon had to think about what he was doing. And in that moment, it meant more for him to retaliate against the player he thought was aggrieving him than to actually do what was best for his club, which is why I think what you were getting to, I think maybe in one of our Discord channels over the weekend, was this is ultimately the only red flag or question mark about this player anymore is like, is his mental side ever going to catch up with the God-given talents that he has? Because let's be clear, he's one of the most all-around attacking players in the Premier League. There isn't a thing he can't do. He creates, he scores with his right, he scores with his left, he can play through the middle, he can play on either flank, and he works his damn tail off on both ends of the pitch. It's everything you want in a player, except for the 6 inches in between his ears.
Yeah, and I just think, you know, I think Gordon probably hits higher highs earlier in his career if it weren't for this. I just don't. I see it in a lot of parts of his games where I just don't think he's grown up. Like, and he has a tendency to get frustrated and boil over, and you get this. We've all seen this challenge. We just forgot that we were 12 and we're at the local park, right? Like the difference is he's a professional footballer. I will say the vibes I get from Gordon very eerily similar to one of my favorite players, Luis Suarez. And the fact that he gets so obsessed in the heat of competition and winning that he'll do anything to win, even if it means he crosses a line. And I think, like, he does that, and ultimately he ends up being a liability. But if he's able to get this completely out of his game, like, there are really no highs that he can't hit. He's a phenomenal footballer, and he's still young enough to do it. But, yeah, his mentality is what's holding him back. And, obviously, hopefully he learns from this and continues, because I would love to see him continue to ascend and play with bigger clubs.
Speaking of a player who has all the skills in the world, probably belongs at a bigger club, though he did just sign a new contract. Matthias Cunha gets the red card sent off for Wolves. While they're drawing 1-1 with Bournemouth, Bournemouth ends up going ahead, winning the match on penalties. I took this image, honestly, mainly because it actually fit on the screen. To be honest, there's actually worse images, which is where he's actually throwing. Like, he doesn't just headbutt the player. He first hits him with a closed fist, then smacks out his mouth, then goes head to head, then proceeds to lean in the way that he does. Now, everybody that's listened to this channel knows I like Kirkez, have been touting him to come to Liverpool for a while. I might headbutt a grown man who decides to get that haircut on his own. Like, I might headbutt his barber for giving him said haircut, but he is Hungarian, so I'm not going to question why he cuts his hair the way he does. But when it comes to this one by Cunha, this is his second red card of the year, second straight red, delivered by the FA. He also had that ugly encounter where he put his hands on, I believe it was the trainers for Ipswich or another club. Who was it?
It was Ipswich. It was I think it was security. It was like their security team.
Their security for trying to get people off the field. But he was way over the top. A lot of people thought he escaped that one with just a 3-match ban and not anything extra. Precedent here says the league has an easy route to 5 matches for the second red, but could go even further. What is fair here? What is too much? And should the powers that be take into any account the fact that this is the only team that could possibly go down? And if you suspend this player for any longer than the minimum or an agreed upon 5 matches, 4 matches. Like, if they were to give him an 8 or 10 match ban and he were out for to the remainder of the season and Wolves go down, do you think the EPL, who we all know worries about their own image, would be worried about lawsuits and what that might look like if they were to make a big stand without too much precedent that potentially led to a club getting relegated?
In my opinion, they shouldn't. I don't think how you ban a player should have to do with the position of the team on the table. I really don't. And I think for me, there's obviously multiple offenses of violent conduct here. To me, the thing that is the most egregious and the most offensive and the most concerning to me isn't necessarily the violent conduct itself. It's having to get him physically dragged down the tunnel because he's so out of control that he can't even remove himself from the pitch. To me, that's a player that shows you that they have some severe issues with not only their emotional regulation, but just some mental health stuff. That is a player that is lost it. And that's not to say, we all don't lose it in the moment. But to be that far removed and that hard to come down in any sort of sense of reason is really alarming to me.
Yeah, and that's twice. I mean, that's twice he has had to be physically removed from the pitch after receiving red cards. And, I do feel for Vito Pereira here a little bit because what's he supposed to do? He's got to back up He backs up his player. He was pretty adamant that he was disappointed in Cunha and he's let us down, but we're going to support him through this and we'll get through this together. I feel like it has to be more than 3 matches.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it's not more than 5 because I don't want this to be the bigger story. I don't want this to go further. And I also don't want it to be a blight on a player that I do believe has been one of the bright spots of the bottom half of the table of this Premier League season. I think Matheus Cunha has been one of the really cool stories, and him signing an extension at Wolves that doesn't give him an escape clause or a release clause proves he's kind of giving back to this club that's given to him, and he wants to be there and thinks there's something to build on. And, Wolves have looked much, much better since the manager change. So it's almost disappointing that now you're going to lose this guy and you're going back to Strand Larson and Hwang and Sarabia instead of arguably a top 6-7 striker in the Premier League, helping you see out the rest of the way. So let's look quickly here at the draw for the quarterfinals of the FA Cup, which will be played on the weekend of March 29th. Brighton hosting Forest, Fulham with a London derby against Palace. In shocking fashion, somehow Preston didn't draw Man City, but Preston gets Villa, and Man City will have to travel all the way to the South Coast and take on Bournemouth in their tiny little stand. So let's start there, Paul. Bournemouth, Man City, who goes through and why?
Oh, I'll go Man City here. I don't love it. I actually think this is probably going to be one of those ones that slugs it out and ends up in extra time or penalties. Are they extra time in the quarterfinals? Go straight to penalties?
Yeah.
Okay. I can
extra time then penalties.
I can never keep it straight. I just think it's going to go longer than it should. I think City probably just hammers this one out eventually. I don't feel as good about Bournemouth as I did 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think the wheels feel like they're starting to come off in a very similar fashion to Forest. So yeah, I think City probably edges it.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. When City went out of the Champions League, I said to myself, well, I guess, all they have to play for now is finishing top 4 and maybe winning the FA Cup. And then I was like, well, will they really care about it? Because last year after they won the league, they allowed Manchester United to celebrate in front of them because they basically showed up with this is a charity shield to us, you bleepers. We won the league. You guys can have the FA Cup. I got a feeling he might be able to garnish up just enough pride in them to try to go out and win a trophy the rest of the way. And they do have a lot of kids, and they have some players that are playing for their first trophy at City. So maybe they go out there. I hope Bournemouth gets that victory. I will say I believe Villa will do the business with Preston. I think Villa is starting to find a little better form. I think the fact that Rashford's starting to contribute, and I think you see the type of a player Asensio is, and you understand why he was a big part of Real Madrid at one point and ended up at big clubs and linked to big clubs. Let's touch on the other two. Fulham Palace. Where would you go here? Who do you want to win this game?
Oh, this is another tough one. Palace has been in great form. I think Fulham's the better side, top to bottom, especially, they're going to be without Mateta, I would imagine. I don't know. It's 4 weeks. Maybe he's back. I think I'm going Fulham here. I just think that they're just top to bottom, the better side here, even though I know Palace has kind of had a resurgence lately. I think out of the 4 fixtures, I think this is a sneaky good fixture.
Yeah, I think the Fulham Crystal Palace one has the chance to be the best. I think Bournemouth City, if they both played each other wide open and they were on their day, that could be a 3-2 cup tie that's like for the ages, where Bournemouth gets a late one and all 7,200 people get naked, as Kazi was saying, just go, just start doing laps around the city ground. And they all go for a skinny dip on the beach right after the match. I think the one that genuinely has the chance to be the worst match, but the most important is Brighton Forest. Because I'm with you. I think the wheels have come off Forest. I think there's as good a chance Forest finishes 6th or 7th as there is they finish 3rd at this point. And I could see them losing this match as well. I think if I were putting my money right now, to steal our stocks style, I think I would put Brighton as the second favorite to City to win this entire thing. Um, and how great would it be for Brighton? I would love it if Brighton got to play City in the final. Because anyone that remembers, I can't remember if it was a League Cup or an FA Cup where Brighton got to the final. And I can't remember the guy's name. He was like the prototypical Brighton player. He was the one who brought them up, scoring all the big goals. And then as soon as they got to the Premier League, everybody realized he wasn't a Premier League player. But he scored the first goal like minutes into the game at Wembley, and they were up 1-0. And everyone was like, "Can we believe? Will the Seagulls win it?" And then City won the final 6-1. And it was like the most embarrassing final of all time. And it would be a great way for Brighton to kind of save a little face and get that back. I think that would be really, really exciting for me. Really, really interesting. So we just got a couple minutes left here, Paul. I did want to look quickly